All right. So I'm going to talk about, I'm going to start off with the thing that I'd say probably one of the things that keep me up at night, and that is the balancing act that I have to do, right? So this balancing act between cost, right, because I'm responsible for my budget for all of contact center operations, as well as I say employment satisfaction, but you can also call that employee attrition, that balance that I have to do, along with the customer, probably, which is one of the most important things, right, is my customers and the expectations that they actually have. So balancing that is always a juggle. As we talked a little bit earlier, I do one, I raise another one. I do another one, it raises another one, right? So I'm constantly dealing with that balancing act, right? So a lot of people say, well, how do you do that? And my quick, easy answer is I have an amazing team, right? So you actually heard from Chris on my team. I have amazing managers like that that help me do that balancing act. So that's the easiest part of my job is I put great people in place. They actually make the great things happen. That's a lot of what I do. But I'd say outside of that is we do a lot of things with employee engagement, right, on how we engage that. And then I think when we went with Replicant, we had to really spend a lot of time showing the agents the benefit of having the bot there, right? So that allowed me to continue to balance that between the money that I was spending, whether it was with Replicant or whether it was the amount of money that we could save. All of those things was just allowing me to get to that balancing act. And I'd say that journey doesn't ever stop because I'm balancing that every day, all day, constantly because employee attrition is going up or down, or I'm just having to balance the two out. So that's how I do that balancing act. Next, you'll see this is a huge part of our business, right, is our roadside business. That is a business that really within the last few years has grown tremendously. I started with Love's 8 years ago. And when I started with Love's, how many have actually been to a Love's? Gosh, I wish I had gift cards because I would really take care of you guys. But so when I started with Love's 8 years ago, we had 300 stores in just about, I want to say maybe 20,000 employees. The contact center was about 20 employees, and no, I'm sorry, I had about 40 people because I had some in help desk and some in customer service, so about 40 people. Fast forward 8 years later, we have 640 stores. We have about 40,000 employees, and all in the contact center now, I have about 350 between the Dominican Republic and the U.S., right? So when you look at that growth that we were actually contributing, a large part of it was just what you see on the truck or on the screen right now is with our roadside. That business really grew out of control on us, which is a good problem to have, right? That the business was growing that much. So it was meeting that demand, right? Because we had customers that were wanting this roadside event that was going on. And just when you grow that fast, right, in 600 some odd stores, that by itself is not that big of a feat. But when you do that and you double that number, right, and we're still growing, we still open up about 40 stores every year, right? And every time we open a new store, my help desk team has to deal with the demands of the help desk side and the demands of handling those new employees in a new location, as well as we have to help. We're juggling obviously all those new customers that we add on, mainly if it's a state we've never been in actually before. So we got into this side of the business. I'm going to take you through this, and I am going to mention that word that we don't want to say the C word, but COVID, because I think we have to mention that word, right? So you could see my volume and what my volume was doing right around the time of COVID. Everything was kind of trugging right along. Then all of a sudden, boom, COVID hit. Then we had almost like this was the making of a perfect storm, right? Because then we had some really bad weather that hit the same time COVID was hitting. Well, right when that all happened, if I had my attrition line of my employees, it goes with this same curve, right? When my customers are having to wait 40 minutes, and I remember at one time it was 40 plus minutes to get to an agent, no agent wants to take that call of the customer that's been waiting 40 minutes, right? I mean, if that customer was, excuse my language, if that customer was pissed off, they're twice as pissed now that they waited 45 minutes to get to an agent, right? So that actually went into my attrition. I was losing agents not because so much that the job itself was hard taking care of the customer. The job was hard because we almost made it hard in that it was just that they didn't want to take those calls. They didn't want to have to sit there when they have to walk in, and the first thing they walk in the morning, they look at the wall boards that are all over the call center, and these wall boards are just blinking red, right? And they're seeing how long that wait is. No agent wants to log in and do that, right? I remember when I first started my career years and years ago when I worked for Citibank, and I remember walking into the queue and you seeing those huge numbers, and I'd be like, yeah, not today, right? And I think I'm going to call in sick even though I'm already in the building. I'm out, right? You just didn't want to do that. So I know I had to fix that. So you can see when I got to that peak, this is the same time our business was doubling in size. We didn't stop building things, right? Even though things were going on. Well, then that roadside volume was picking up and picking up and picking up. Same time, a lot of businesses didn't have tires. We had tires because of our size. We were also building retread plants. We had all these things that were going on that were great for the business, but that were driving my volume crazy, which in turn was driving my agents crazy. So we got to that high point. My volume, you can see, actually doubled from the volume that was actually coming in. I was going through this crazy, how in the world do I recruit people in? Let me go back a second, talking about that COVID time. I remember when that happened, because as Chris pointed out, I'm the one that called him, so I'm admitting the guilt. I called him when he was on his family vacation. I said, hey, we ain't shutting down. Not going to happen. We ain't closing. We're open. Won't happen. Everyone else in corporate was closing. I said, I'm not shutting down. I said, finish your vacation. We're good. Then I called him back a couple days later and said, hey, I'm going to need you to come back because we're going to shut this thing down. So anyway, I had an amazing group of managers that dealt with that of moving all these people, and we were not an at-home center at all, and how we were going to transition all of those agents to go at home, and all the problems from agents not having internet to just a slew of problems. They were living in one-bedroom apartments, and there was just no way they were going to have these 3 monitors and this coax cable running halfway across their apartment. I mean, there was a whole bunch of problems that were going on during that time, which led to a lot of employee attrition. Anyway, then we get to the point where volume was doubleized. My attrition was probably at that time somewhere north of 50%, right? I was just turning agents so fast, we just couldn't get them in the door quick enough. So I sat down with my managers and we started thinking, how are we going to do this? We got to find a solution that is scalable. Because to continue, not just that it's hard to hire people, I just can't do it, right? We just can't continue to hire. Oklahoma City, while it's a big city, there's just not that much population for us to pull that many agents. It just wasn't there, right? Something had to give. So we had to start looking at tools of what tool can we engage that would actually allow us to be scalable to meet this volume, because things like those crazy snowstorms, I knew they would die off eventually, right? I didn't think it was going to be as cold as it was, as long as it was, but I knew they would die off eventually, right? And we always have those summer pikes, and then right now we start to go into lull season. Once weather picks up, then we kind of climb back up. But I had to figure out a way to actually do that. So I remember, and I'm going to derail just a second and talk about how I got started with Replicant, because it's a little bit of a funny story. I don't know how many, probably like a lot of you in this room, you get phone calls from salespeople. You're like, click, click, hit deletes on all these emails that I get. Well, I got a phone call from my sales rep at the time that said, hey, would you like to join a chocolate tasting? And I'm like, what salesperson would send me something for a chocolate tasting? But I'm like, I don't even like chocolate. But my wife does, so this will be cool. I can maybe get her a free gift because they're going to send me this chocolate. I kind of win-win deal on this. Anyway, so I joined this tasting, and they had this connoisseur of chocolate, and and it was break the chocolate, smell the chocolate. I'm like, this is pretty neat, right? This thing that they're having us do. Anyway, it was neat was that they didn't even try to sell me. On that call, there was no selling. I was like, wow, okay, that was cool. Gave my wife this free chocolate, good deal, right? A few days go by, and then my sales rep calls and says, hey, can I now talk to you? And I'm like, sure. I got the free gift. I'll let you take my time and talk to me. Anyway, that's how that journey started, which is the weirdest scenario of how I got to be in with Replicant right now, and after all the stuff that we've done. But we entered this journey, and I've been leading call centers for, I'm not going to age myself, but it's been over 25 years that I've led call centers. And for the first time in that time, and I've heard a lot of pitches from a lot of different technology, it was actually one that was going to be a game changer. I really saw that there was opportunities beyond belief with this particular product. So that's when we got into that. You can see when we signed the deal in July actually of that year, and then we actually started taking our first calls 3 months later that we were up and viable with the product. And you could see what it did from my volume perspective. And again, if you had my attrition line up there, it would do the exact same curve, right? And so can I say Replicant by itself actually transformed my center with my agents? No. Did it help greatly? Yes, because what it's doing for us, it's taking those calls that the agent is not having to take those routine calls, right? When you talk to the agents, they don't really want to spend time telling the customer what their balance is, right? Because that is just a very boring call. They want the calls that they need to be engaged with and actually have to think when they're actually talking to a customer. So that's what it actually allowed me to do. It took away some of those easy calls that were, when I look at my cost per call, right, and it allowed me to get rid of some of those easy calls and allowed my focus to focus on the actual hard calls. Well, when it did that, ultimately, you could see what it did. While my volume dropped, but it was actually more importantly that I was getting rid of the easy calls and the complex calls were all being done with the rep. So next, you can see so I have some of the metrics up here of what it's done with this. We're about 2 years into the journey. That number is actually out of date here, even from the time I sent them that number. We're actually $1.2 million in savings, right? That's just directly to the bottom line of the amount of money that I've been able to save back. And this, I'm looking at just the calls that Replicant resolved, right? There's a whole nother group of calls that I'm not even counting in that savings, and that is that we have on our ERS calls, we have the bot actually take the first half of the call for the agent, gathering all the important information, then it transfers the call to an agent. So that's not even in that because that's a cost savings, right? Obviously on saving that handle time. That is just on calls that it's actually been able to resolve from beginning to end with the customer, right? And then my attrition. I mean, I am proud to say, and again, not just Replicant, because I would be taken away from something from all the powerful managers that work for me. But I have taken from 50%, and I'm actually south of 25% attrition at this point in time. So that is just a tremendous number for me when I've dropped to that point. And then when I look at, when I say, not only are we those are two great numbers. I know you normally would be happy with that, but what are my customers saying after they talk to the bot? 90+% of them are actually walking away with a positive experience, right? So that tells me that we are doing the right thing and we got the right technology in place. As I kind of said earlier, what this is avoiding that rep burnout. Right? We all know that if you get an agent that can last more than a year, we're excited. But for me in my business, I know that if an agent makes it past 90 days, traditionally this was the mark, right? That first 90 days was the part they were most subject to actual volatility of leaving us. But then definitely when it hit that 1 year mark, most agents are burned out, right? And they want to leave or either move off to another position. Hopefully we can retain them and keep them in the company. In most cases we can't. They actually end up leaving Loves altogether, right? So this has allowed us for those agents now are actually having to think and they're taking calls where they actually have to be engaged with the customer and not just your balance is X. It talks a little bit about here about the relationship and what I think of the relationship with Replicant. We are a privately held company, and we talk about the Loves as a family. And Replicant became part of that family because they don't not just in it to sell me a product, right? They're in it for the journey. When I look at my success people on that side, it's how can we help better resolve this? So I think they almost get more excited than I do on how we're going to actually tackle what's coming ahead, right? So it's just not, someone earlier talked about looking around what's coming around the corner, right? What's in front of us that's the easy stuff. It's actually what's actually coming and how we're going to continue to tackle that volume. Because what I do know for sure is we're not going to stop growing, right? We haven't stopped at this point in time, and if I'm standing on stage with here next year, we're going to be over that 700 mark in number of actual locations, right? And so I know that volume will keep going. So I got to continue to find ways to be scalable to meet that demand without continuing to grow the rep. That's not only, it's a very costly way of doing business. So lastly, thank you. Thank you for having me here. Questions? I don't know if I have time for questions. As long as they're easy ones. Nothing hard. If you're going to ask me about line dancing, I was the guy leaning against the window. I can't help you with line dancing. Yeah, sure. So in our ERS call, there's a lot of information that we have to gather. We're dealing with truckers only, no consumers, it's just truckers. So imagine a trucker is broke down somewhere, doesn't even know where he or she actually is. So as we're gathering that information, we need to gather what's wrong with the truck. Is it mechanical? Is it a tire? Just exactly what's happening. So the bot will gather that information. Is it mechanical? Is it tire? What is it related? Then it actually has to gather, it will actually send a text message getting the actual location of where the driver is. Because imagine you're on the middle of a highway that you've never been. You don't quite know exactly where you're at. You just know you're out there somewhere. So it gathers all that information. It gathers all the easy things to gather on a case. Once it gathers all that, it then actually has a API that actually will transfer all that into Salesforce. Then once it pops to my agent already has the case pretty much in its entirety already completed. The agent just does a light validation of all that information, and then literally will call and find the closest shop that can actually take care of the customer. So while I'm excited about that, and that was already a huge, because that took off about 3 minutes, 2.5 minutes of gathering that information. The bot did that. The next step of where we're taking the bot to at this point in time is it's going to complete an ERS call from beginning to end without even involving an agent, right? And so it's going to gather all that information and then actually call the actual closest shop to where the customer is and get the customer up and going. So again, where this is critical, because normally when our volume, similar to yours, because I know what you guys do, is when that ice storm hits again, my volume spikes through the roof, right? And I would love to say that I have all the staffing in place and we've been able to predict it. Chris's team is actually also responsible for workforce management. They do an amazing job at actually forecasting volume, and they're pretty much right on all the volume they forecast, but Al Roker can't even forecast storms very well. So he just cannot forecast storms that are going to hit, and when they hit, they hurt us bad because we just don't have the staffing. Well, today, I should say I don't care about those storms. I literally have millions of agents that are sitting there ready now to take those calls when that volume spikes. Hopefully that answers your question. Other questions? Going once, going twice. The popcorn is not popping anymore. I think we're done.
All right. Let's give a big round of applause.
Thanks, sir. Thank you.